Points of personal privilege. Mercifully.
The delegate from Arlington, Delegate Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
The delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak in honor of Black History Month this morning. Mr. Speaker, in previous years, I've talked about the poet Langston Hughes and the inventor of the blood bank, Dr. Charles Drew, who grew up in the 49th District, and Freedman's Village near the 49th, and my hero, U.S. Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. This year, I'd like to talk about interactions I've had as I've tried to be an ally and how folks sometimes refuse to see what's all around them. A lot of folks here know my dad and have taken him into their heart. Born in the Andes Mountains of Venezuela, he was one of 22 kids from the same parents. At the age of 19, after saving up $270, he came to the United States with the dream of a better life. He overstayed his tourist visa and undocumented got a green card. He worked as a busboy and a waiter. He learned English. He graduated from Northern Virginia Community College when I was 5 years old, and then took one class a semester every year at George Mason until he graduated from college 1 month before I graduated from high school. He's 85 now, and beautiful, and proud, and still stubborn. Stubborn as a mule. I talk about him not only because of my pride in being his son, but also to talk about identity. My dad has the look of a Táchira Lopez. He is pure Gocho, through and through. And I have the white skin coloring of my mom, the daughter of a Pennsylvania Dutch family going back 200 years. I bring this up because I can't tell you the times, the dozens of times, my dad has been called hateful, ugly, bigoted names and been attacked, sometimes physically, once by a cop for how he looks. I can't tell you how many times someone would cruelly insult my incredibly proud father and look towards me to be in on the joke because obviously I couldn't be his son. Even though I can never truly know what he's feeling as his son, my heart breaks each time. I have a ton of second and third cousins on my mom's side of the family from central Pennsylvania who I grew up with, and I love to the moon and back. We go fishing, and they used to insist on taking me deer spotting and hunting. Nowadays, they live all over, mostly central Pennsylvania and North Carolina, but when we get together over the last few years, the conversations inevitably get to politics, and they always ask me why Democrats can't seem to get past talking about race. They tell me they don't see color. They don't see a problem with race in America. They're not racist. They've got plenty of friends who are Latino and African American, and you know, if you guys just quit talking about it, it wouldn't be a problem anymore. Then later on at a party, we're playing cards with some of their friends. Someone will crack a joke about a religious or ethnic minority. Or somebody will use a hateful word to describe someone from Latin America, and sometimes my incredibly proud father will be standing right there. And instead of confronting the unthinking bigot who just made the remark, my relative, whose diapers my dad helped change decades ago, will laugh. He'll laugh it off, and he'll say, oh, he wasn't referring to your dad. Your dad's one of the good ones. And piece by piece, my heart breaks a little bit more. And I've had men I respect tell me after long policy conversations about the need for action against structural and systemic racism in Virginia and in the United States, they just don't see the problem. Frustrated, I'll ask them, well, if you had a chance to change places right now with an African American or a Latino or another ethnic minority, would you? Then they'll tell me in quiet, measured tones, well, God has given me my gifts. And piece by piece, my heart breaks again. From the first slaves over 400 years ago to a civil war fought by the South to keep men enslaved and in bondage, to Jim Crow, to massive resistance, to the Charlottesville March, with its neo-Nazis and white nationalists, Virginia and our nation have an ugly history of racism and segregation. Racism is a virus that cuts across our entire history. The author James Baldwin said, you assume African Americans should live by an idealism that we've never really seen. We can only judge our society by our institutions. Corporations who don't hire us, real estate executives redlining, the imbalanced healthcare system, and an education system with bigoted textbooks peddling a lost cause fiction. What do you do when so many people don't see or recognize structural and systemic racism in our society? To make things worse, in this body, we are systematically rolling back criminal justice reform and other measures passed in recent years in response to the need for action on racial equity. And now we've got the governor's executive order #1 banning divisive topics in schools. Policies like this cut off the necessary classroom discussion of racial justice and reconciliation taking shape in communities and inspired by the horrible murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and too many others. When you close discussion of America's racial history by citing division, a subjective condition that turns on any students or really any parents' claim to feel resentment or guilt, these policies directly threaten any teacher who pursues a sustained critical understanding of the deeper causes, legacies, or contemporary implications of racism. We know from the history of race in America just where sanitized and whitewashed versions of our past lead to assumptions that inequalities in health and wealth are simply inherent features of American life. Imagine trying to teach the American story in a classroom without talking about the inequities of wealth accumulation due to centuries of stolen labor. How do you teach about the 1902 Virginia Constitution with its poll taxes and literacy tests? How do you explain why there were no black legislators in this General Assembly from 1890 to 1968? How do you explain why Barbara Johns led the walkout at Moughton? How do you teach why Mildred and Richard Loving could not get married in Virginia? How do you teach any of that without being divisive? So what do you do if folks don't even see the problem? What do you say to people who think, well, I'm not being hurt, my children aren't being hurt, my relatives aren't being hurt? How do you get through to people the need to recognize what it is that enables them to have the luxury of not seeing the impact of race in our society? That's the problem. When people assume that just because they don't see, feel, or hear about an issue, it must not be happening at all. The past isn't the past. We can't heal, and we can't come together until we deal with the pain and trauma of our past. We can't ignore it. We've got to connect the dots between the past to the issues of today and grow from what's true. We can't sugarcoat our national sin of slavery or the systematic and structural racism that exists in our country. I also think we need to push back against those who insist on spreading the falsehood that diversity, equity, and truth in education is all about indoctrination. And it isn't about shaming or trying to make people feel guilty. Folks today aren't being blamed for the sins of the past. People are simply asking, begging for their stories. The stories of African Americans and Latinos and Asians and New Americans and indigenous peoples to be heard, just as white stories have been heard for generations. And those stories need to be complete. They need to talk about the great, wonderful, groundbreaking achievements and founding principles of our nation, as well as the sad, ugly, and awful aspects of our history, and how they're still being felt today. Why? Because one, the mark of a mature society is being able to recognize the truth about our past without whitewashing an entire set of facts about what makes us who we are. And two, the only way we can truly grow and heal is if we look at painful truths about our past and deal with them. I think we've got to be honest and admit that structural and systemic racism is real, that this country was created and prospered under the ideals of white supremacy, and that we need to be responsible for righting the wrongs of our forefathers. We didn't create these problems, but we should be the ones to fix them. That's the only way we can create a better future for all of us. The true story about slavery and race in America should give us nightmares. Then they should be taught to everyone. Learning the full truth about what it will make Americans better citizens and better advocates for a more just and equitable society is what we should be doing. But first, we have to recognize that there's a problem in the first place. We have to recognize that the problem actually exists. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.